This is a Rosh Chodesh song. Blessed are you, yeah. Huh? But you don't have to dance. into that doesn't matter how tired I am, if I can get into that place of worship, I receive strength. And this is a song that is worship. And also, when I teach on Shabbat, I'll explain to you the last little verse. Remind me if I don't bring it up. About all of Zion singing Baruch Haba Hashem Yahweh, which is predicted that if all of Zion will welcome him in, Mashiach will come. Lord of eternity, mystery behind the veil, Lord over heaven and earth, God of Israel. Come with your will. Adonai is the word that is used in place of Yahweh. Because it is beyond comprehending who He is. Oh So all that I am, I give to you. Whew. Okay, now I can teach. Whoa. I'm going to start with Rosh Chodesh, and then we're going to take a break, and then I'll talk about Shabbat. Okay? I'm going to start with Rosh Chodesh in part because it's something most of us don't know anything about, have never heard of. It's not a very common thing in our understanding. And there's several reasons for that, and I will talk about that briefly, okay? First of all, what is Rosh Chodesh? It is, if I can pronounce this right, it's the molad of the moon, or the birth of the moon. Now we know the moon is not birthed every month, but it is in fact rebirthed every month. So Rosh Chodesh is the rebirthing every month of the moon. And it is based today on calculations. Calculations that were made centuries ago. Calculations that were made centuries ago by the Sanhedrin, because they knew that with the destruction of the temple, and they knew that with the attempts that had already happened to break this stuff down and the way that things had happened, that it would be really hard to maintain this from Jerusalem, especially when the Romans kicked them out of Jerusalem and wouldn't allow anyone Jewish to be there. But it could only be declared by the Sanhedrin. So before the Sanhedrin was disbanded, they put together a calendar system that we still use today. The calendar system is still in effect today. There have been no adjustments done from what was done then. And the interesting thing to me is that even though there are those now in the land who are attempting to celebrate the new moon by visual observation from Jerusalem, they've never been off but by 1 or 2 days at the most, and even that it's usually been because there was a cloud cover, we didn't see the moon. So these guys were good at their math and at their understanding of the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, because you see these two work together in the Hebrew calendar. It's not purely a lunar calendar. If it were purely a lunar calendar, then after a while Passover would cease being at the beginning of the harvest of barley and would begin moving around and moving and moving and moving. The Islamic calendar is strictly lunar. That's why you will see their celebrations make a cycle all the way around the seasons. But the cycle that God put together was also dependent on the interaction between the moon and the sun, so that a harvest festival was always at the harvest. Rosh Hashanah will always be in the fall. He set it up so there would be an adjustment happen, so that the festivals stayed in the seasons they belonged in. Okay? Rosh Chodesh means head of the month, just like Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. And the head of the month technically is the first day of the new moon, of the new month, declared when the new moon is sighted in the evening. And as is tradition in Judaism, the day begins at sunset and goes to the next sunset. So a day is from sunset to sunset, not from morning to morning. But Rosh Chodesh is the first day. Technically, if a month is 30 days, some are 29, some are 30, then there are 2 days celebrated as Rosh Chodesh. The 30th day of the month and the first day of the month. Again, we come back to that concept of we don't want to be wrong, we don't want to miss it, we'll celebrate them together. In the diaspora, it's typical to celebrate 2 days always, because just in case You want to celebrate it on the calendar day, but just in case the word didn't get to you in time, you go ahead and start it even if you didn't get the word, if you know when it's supposed to be. It's kind of interesting things. According to Judaism 101, which you can look up online, there's a lot of sources online, by the way, that you can look these things up at and read. I will tell you, it's a good idea to really pray and ask the Lord to guide you at what you see. Because there's some interesting stuff, and I'll tell you an interesting thing I found in a few minutes. According to Judaism 101, historically, Rosh Chodesh was declared only by the Sanhedrin. It was declared when 2 different eyewitnesses were able to come and report that they had seen the rebirth of the moon. Then the month would be declared, and a message was sent out. The message was sent out in 2 ways. One, by the blowing of the trumpets from the temple steps, and then blowing of trumpets around the country, but additionally also by the setting of a bonfire. So they would set a bonfire on this mountain, and it would light on this mountain, and then they would be ready. They would be ready, so that the message of the new month could go all the way around the known world at the time very quickly, just by the lighting of the bonfires. It was a system that was used by other people, which is a reason that they ceased using it. Because when other peoples got the message and started doing it also, then what happened was, you're messing up when the new moon is. If it's used to signal other things, and it began to be used to signal other things by the Romans, by the Greeks, and by others, that system of message. So that even in the time of the kings of England, this was how the birth of a king was declared. They would light the bonfire, and the bonfires would be put on the mountains until it could go around, so that everybody knew that the new king had been born. Once the month was declared, with the blowing of the trumpet, with the lighting of the fire, the next day was a festival day. Again, the shofar was sounded in the morning. It was considered a solemn day with convocations, which is a big fancy word for an assembly of prayer or rehearsal of something. Convocation is a rehearsal. It's an assembly that practices something. So they would have a solemn assembly. There would be prayer and special sacrifices at the temple, additional to the daily. It would be a day when there were family festivals and festivities. Special dinners were held. But when the temple was destroyed, when the Sanhedrin was disbanded, these celebrations ceased to be in that way. In modern days, the custom of the celebration of Rosh Chodesh has become a woman's holiday. In modern Judaism, it's specifically a day for women to celebrate. And this is based on oral tradition, and I'll tell you a couple of those stories. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. This is off of ritualwell.org about the Rosh Chodesh, written by a modern rabbi. I printed this off in 2004. Okay, so it's been a while, but it doesn't really change. It hasn't changed much. And the question was made, how did Rosh Chodesh become a woman's holiday? And the rabbi that's writing this is Rabbi Jill Hammer. So, you know, it's written by a woman. The tradition comes from 3 different places. One is in the story of the golden calf. Remember in the golden calf it is said that the Israelite men took the earrings and brought them to be made. It's presumed from the word take that the women did not voluntarily give up their earrings. The women refused, so the men had to take them from them. And because the women stood their ground and said, no, you can't do this, women get to have a special holiday, Rosh Chodesh. Another story comes from a medieval commentator that when the Israelites in the wilderness gave the materials for the making of the tabernacle, according to this person, women donated more than the men did. See, they hadn't given up their jewelry for the golden calf, so they had more to give. Again, this is oral tradition. And because the women gave more, they're given an additional holiday. Oral tradition. The third story is, to me, the most interesting of the oral traditions. And the reason I keep emphasizing oral tradition is because this is not scriptural. This is not even really biblical. Yes, they based those first two stories on something that happened in the scripture, but they base it by going in and separating out specific letters and words, and they really dig to get that meaning. And I can't tell you for sure that that's what it means. I don't know. There were women and men dancing around the golden calf. So I don't know that the women didn't participate, at least some. But the third story is regarding the connection between women and the moon. According to the Talmud, the moon precipitates an argument because originally she and the sun were the same size. This is the Babylonian Talmud, Hulin 60b, if anybody ever wants to look it up. I just want to make sure you know that there are sources for this. It's just, you know. And here's the story in the Talmud. The moon said to God, "O sovereign of the universe, can two kings share a single crown?" Saying, you know, we're both the same size. How can this work? This isn't going to work. You can't have two dominating. So God replied, well, then go and make yourself smaller. Sovereign of the universe, she said to him, because I made a proper claim before you, then I am to make myself smaller? He said, go. You will rule over both the day and the night. She said, what? What good is a lamp in broad daylight? Because remember, the moon just reflects the light of the sun, right? And he said, go. Israel will use you to count the days and the years. And we do. You use the moon to count the days and the years. Okay. And the moon went on complaining. On seeing that the moon was not consoled, the Holy One of Blessing said this, bring an atonement for me, for making the moon smaller. Hence, there is a sin offering at the new moon, offered in the temple. In the story, the moon points out that the fundamental problem of duality, how can two beings be equally important? She didn't offer a solution, but she asked a question. Instead of answering her, God commanded her to make herself smaller, implying that yes, one does have to be bigger. When the moon complained that this was unjust, and no matter what other gifts and enticements she's offered, she refuses to give up her claim of equality, God is eventually forced to admit that the situation is unfair, and he makes a sin offering every month to atone for this injustice. Do you think God is ever unjust? I don't think so. It's part of why I look at this and I go, this is kind of a cute story, but it's just a story. So too, though, women have been smaller in influence within the traditions. And this is how women get connected with Rosh Chodesh. Women have been made smaller. They have continued to pursue equity and fairness, just as the moon did, according to the legend. And just as the moon, according to the legend, eventually will be restored to her full size in the time of Messiah, so many women hope to claim full equality when society is transformed. Okay, then. This is why I tell you, I glean from many sources, but I constantly ask the Lord, is this of you? Is this of you? Is this of you? And I'll be honest, I read this and I kind of go, that's interesting, but I don't think that's it. And there are a lot of things in the oral tradition that are just like that. The legends then tell us the origin of Rosh Chodesh as a woman's holiday, but they probably came about a long time after it was being celebrated that way. I'll be honest, I have absolutely no desire to reclaim Rosh Chodesh as a feminist holiday, because that's exactly what this rabbi is declaring it as being, a feminist holiday. And when you go online and you look up Rosh Chodesh, you will find an awful lot of things that relate it to women. You'll find a lot of things that relate it to women being reborn, that relate it to women coming up, that relate it in a very real way as a feminist holiday. That's not what it is biblically. Okay? But it is a biblical holiday. Genesis 1:4. It says this. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heaven. That's 2, sorry, that's 2:4. I'm in the wrong book. Genesis 1:4 is this. Okay. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. And then when we go down and we see where he created the lights in the heavens, Genesis 1:14, now this is on the 3rd day of creation. So there was light before there were lights in the heavens. Do you notice that? The sun's not been created yet, but there was light. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. So part of the lights that God created was the sun and the moon and all of the constellations of the stars. And it says here, let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So the lights in the sky, the lights that we see, are there as signs. I'm not going to go into the astronomy aspect of it. There's stuff like that online too, and there's some phenomenal things if you study out astronomy. In Judaism, the whole concept of astrology is pretty popular, actually. The months are represented just as much by their astrological signs as they are by the tribes. And when you look at some of the stuff regarding the months, you'll see a lot of information that comes out of that. And they get it from this, that it says the lights in the sky are for signs. They're there to teach us something. And the way the constellations move in the sky is part of how the seasons are determined. And that was the mathematics they did to determine the seasons and the months and the days and the years, where the constellations are. I'm going to go back to the whole concept of Rosh Chodesh. Psalm 104:19. That's not right.
You sure?
Yeah, that's not right. Ah, there. Yeah, it is. I was looking at the wrong. I was looking at 18. I'm tired. I wonder why. Anyway, okay. 104:19. He made the moon for seasons, and the sun knows the place of its setting. 104:19. One of the reasons that he created the moon was to help us establish the seasons. That's what the Bible says. That's what David wrote. And then we have a couple other verses that we'll look up in a little bit that I've got. Numbers 10:10. Let's see what else the Bible says about Rosh Chodesh. And this is talking about the use of the silver trumpets. You know, we've become very familiar with the shofars, but in the temple and in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, silver trumpets were also used. And it says, make yourself 2 trumpets of silver of hammered work, and that's the beginning of 10. But then when you go down to verse 10, it says, and in the day of your gladness, and in your appointed feasts, and on the first days of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings, and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be as a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. So one of the things that is done for the new month, which is Rosh Chodesh, is blowing the silver trumpet over the sacrifices and over the gifts that are brought, the peace offerings. Numbers 29, 11 through 15 also gives us more very specific sacrifices that were to be done for Rosh Chodesh. Numbers 29 is where God is outlining all of the ways of the sacrifices, saying which sacrifices to be given when and to be given how, which sacrifice was given on the Shabbat, which sacrifice was given for each festival. But 11 through 15 that's not right either. I wrote that down wrong. Okay. Well, what day is it?
And
But it's-
9 is talking about Sabbath.
Yeah, 9 is talking about, am I in the right chapter? I checked all this morning, and actually what happened was the notes that I had put together for all of this are on a computer that crashed, so I had to try to put them back together again. So if I'm making some mistakes here, I'm really sorry. I had to try to put it together real quick today. But it talks about it in the 7th month on the first day of the month. Oh, okay. There we go. 28. It's Numbers 28, not 29. I knew I'd read it. Numbers 28, 11. At the beginning of each of your months, and I need a pen to correct that in my notes, if you don't mind. Thank you. I don't want that written down wrong later. Numbers 28, 11. At the beginning of each of your months, you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord, 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old without defect, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour for grain offering mixed with oil for each bull, and 2/10 of fine flour for grain offering mixed with oil for the 1 ram, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering for each lamb, for a burnt offering of a soothing aroma, an offering by fire to the Lord. And their libation shall be half a hin of wine for a bull, and 1/3 of hin for the ram, and 1/4 of hin for the lamb. And this is the burnt offering of each month throughout the months of the year. And 1 male goat for a sin offering to the Lord. So each month there was a sin offering. It shall be offered with its libation in addition to the continual burnt offerings. So there were continual burnt offerings given to the Lord. There were daily sacrifices. And then at Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month, there were additional sacrifice added. And the question might be, well, why? Why the first day of the month would he want to do all this? Well, if we think about it this way, the first is something that is special to God. The first of anything is always special to God. It says the firstborn son belongs to him. And in Israel, the firstborn son was either taken to the temple, like Hannah took Samuel, or was redeemed. The firstborn animal, the first animal to come out of any womb, was offered to the Lord as a first fruit offering. The first belonged to God. The first always belonged to God. The first of the harvest belonged to God. The first fruits offering, because that's what it comes down to, it is a first fruit offering, or what it's called, is in addition, It's in addition to the tithes and other offerings. I know there's a lot of Christians that go on the whole concept of, I give my tithe, I give my tithe, I give my tithe. That's great. It's a wonderful place to start. It is. It's a wonderful place to start. Tithe means tenth. In Hebraic tradition, the way the tithe is calculated is you count 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep, 4 sheep, 5 sheep, 6 sheep, 7, 8, 9, 10th sheep. This one belongs to God. Okay? The first fruit is the other direction. Because you notice I counted from 1 to 10. The 10th, the first belonged to me there, right? But not if it's the firstborn. Not if it's the first flock of the flock. That belongs to God. The first fruit is an additional to the 10th. So you know that first dollar that's put up at the businesses? Guess what? Guess whose that really is? You know, it's kind of a different concept. In Nehemiah chapter 10, and we read Nehemiah last week. I love Nehemiah, where he builds the walls and goes through the process. And I had a lot of fun studying it and reading it. Nehemiah chapter 10. It's 9. Verse 35, he outlines that which is being restored, which needs to be restored to the temple. So, would someone be willing to read that for me? Nehemiah 10:35 through 39.
And we made ordinances to bring the first fruits of our ground and the first fruits of all fruit of all trees, year by year, to the house of the Lord, to bring the firstborn of our sons and our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstborn of our herds and our flocks, to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God, to bring the first fruits of our dough, our offerings, the fruit from all kinds of trees, the new wine and oil to the priests, to the storeroom of the house of our God, and to bring the tithes of our land to the Levites, for the Levites should receive the tithes in all our farming communities. And the priest, the descendant of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites receive tithes, and the Levites shall bring up 1/10 of the tithes to the house of our God, to the rooms of the storehouse. For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain, of the new wine, and the oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are, where the priests who minister and the gatekeepers and the singers are, and we will not neglect the house of our God.
So here he mentions 3 different givings. Okay? The first is the first fruit, and he outlines that the first fruit is of everything. He specifies the first child, the first fruit from the tree, the first wine, the first, all of that stuff. He specifies all of that. The first of the dough. Okay? So he mentions that. And then he says in verse 38, the Levites receive tithes. That's 10%. That's a specified amount. By the way, with the first fruits, unless it's like a specific animal that's born, if it's a first fruit of grain, it kind of depends on how big your hand is as to how much is the first fruit offering. It's not really specified how much. Okay. So if it can be, if it's something you can grab by a handful, you can, that's determined by you as to how much it is. So you could give the first $1 or the first $10. And it doesn't really make a difference. The first fruits, the tithes, and then in verse 39, he mentions something else again. And he says, for the sons of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the contributions of the grain, the new wine and the oil to the chambers. There are the utensils. The contributions are considered an additional thing. Those are voluntary offerings. So that you've got three different things talked about here. Offerings, first fruits, and tithes, all three. Or in the order that it was given here, first fruits, tithes, and voluntary offerings. Nehemiah 12:44 repeats the list. It says this, on that day men were also appointed over the chambers for the stores, the contributions, or the free will offerings, the first fruits, and the tithes, to gather into them from the fields of the cities for the portions required by the law for the priests and Levites, for Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who served. So the first fruits becomes part of Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Chodesh is the first day of the month, so it belongs to God. So Rosh Chodesh is a first fruit. It makes sense that the first day of the month should belong to God. So then I looked at it and went, okay, how is it celebrated biblically? Not how is it celebrated by Jews of today, but biblically, what did they do? And did they celebrate it? Do we have examples of it being celebrated? And we do. We have several examples. We have an example of David. King Saul celebrated the new moon. And we're going to use that verse in just a few minutes to tell you part of what we do for the month. But Saul celebrated the new moon, and David celebrated it with him on a regular basis. Solomon lists the new moon, Rosh Chodesh, as one of the reasons he wants to build the temple, so that the sacrifices for the new moon can be brought to the temple. He lists that. And then we just read about from Nehemiah about the first fruits. And in 10:33, he specifically names for the new moon. He says, for the showbread, for the continual grain offering, for the continual burnt offering, the Sabbaths, the new moon, for the appointed times. So the new moon is listed with the Sabbaths and with the appointed times, which are the festivals we've already been talking about. It's listed there. Another person we see that we know celebrated the new moon is from an indirect reference, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but the Shunammite woman. Do you remember that Elijah, there was a woman, the Shunammite woman, that had built a special room for him to help take care of him? And he gave her, he wanted to bless her, and so he prayed a blessing over her to open her womb, and she had a son. We'll read that story in a minute. We know she celebrated the new moon based on something her husband said. What does the Bible say we're supposed to do for the new moons? Psalm 81. And this is David writing. No, this is Asaph writing, one of the leaders of the worship in the tabernacle that David set up. And I'd like someone else to read that, please. Psalm 81, verses 3 through 7.
Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel, and a law of the God of Jacob. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt. For I heard a language that I understood not. I removed his shoulder from the burden. His hands were delivered from the pots. Thou calledst in trouble, and I delivered you. I answered you in the secret place of thunder. I proved you at the waters of Meribah, Selah.
So we see that David, in the tabernacle that was set up, he had Asaph wrote psalms, and he wrote songs for them to sing, and one of the songs was about the celebration of the new moon and the celebration of the feast day. Because it's blow the trumpet at the new moon. And then it says, and at the full moon on our feast day. So both days were considered a day for blowing of the trumpet. Both days. And one of the ways that they get the concept that it's supposed to be a day of rest is where it says, I relieved his shoulder from the burden, his hands were freed from the basket. And so that on the new moon, Rosh Chodesh, it's also supposed to be a day of rest. It's supposed to be a joyful celebration. Blow the trumpet. Celebrate it. The first of that says, sing for joy to the Lord our strength. Shout joyfully to the God of Jacob. Raise a song, strike a timbrel, the sweet-sounding lyre with the harp. Blow the trumpet at the new moon. So these are all something that's done. Hosea 2:1. Nope, that's not the right reference. That's not the right reference. I wrote that down wrong. Okay. So what happens when I have to go in a hurry? Anyway, we've got the Psalm 81 that talks about it as this time of celebration. We have a day of rest mentioned there a little bit. Amos 8:5. I hope this is right. Yeah, there it is. Good. And I'm going to start with verse 4. Hear this, Amos chapter 8. Hear this, you who trample the needy, to do away with the humble of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may buy grain? So it's presumed from that if the new moon is there, you're not supposed to be buying grain. Then it says, on the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller, the shekel bigger, and to cheat dishonest scales. So what he's saying is that this is what they were doing. They were complaining about the rest enforced for the new moon, and complaining about the rest enforced for the Sabbath. And God was correcting them for that. We presume from that the new moon was treated as a Sabbath day. There was not selling on that day. Special offerings were given. We already read in Nehemiah, and we read in Numbers 28:11 through 15, the additional offerings that were given. And there I have it written right. The offerings that were given in addition to the other offerings. So we have it's a joyful celebration. We have it's a day of rest. We have special offerings. It's also a day of worship. I want to go to Isaiah 66:23. In fact, I'll start with 22. I always like to back up. You know, there's a phrase that I've used before, this concept that when you study Scripture, we need to make sure we have 20/20 vision. We want to see it clearly. That means you got to read 20 verses before and 20 verses after to make sure you don't take it out of context. So Isaiah 66, verse 22 says this, for just as the new heavens and the new earth which I make will endure before me, declares the Lord, so your offspring and your name shall endure. And it shall be from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all mankind will come to bow down before me, says the Lord. This is a prophecy for the millennial kingdom, when Messiah is returned. All mankind is going to celebrate the new moon. All mankind will celebrate the Sabbath. And they will celebrate it how? By worship. By coming and worshiping before the Lord. When Saul celebrated the new moon, and David celebrated it with him, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, we see how Saul celebrated it. Verse 5. This is David and Jonathan talking to each other in the field. Why were David and Jonathan talking to each other in the field? Because David had heard that Saul was trying to kill him. Jonathan didn't believe his father was going to do that. Jonathan and David were very close friends. So they met in the field and talked about it, and Jonathan told him, whatever you say, do. I'll do it. Verse 5 says this, so David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon. See, they were predicting it, right? They were predicting it. They weren't waiting to see it happen. They already predicted it. They knew when it was going to happen. Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I ought to sit down to eat with the king. But let me go that I might hide myself in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave to return to Bethlehem, because it's a yearly sacrifice there for the whole family. The king expected people to be at his table for the new moon. Remember I said it was a day of family feasting. King expected the people of his court to be part of his family and to come to his table for the new moon. David's excuse to him was, but my family was holding a special feast on that day. So feasting was a part of it. But there was another part also. In 2 Kings chapter 4 is the story of the Shunammite woman. I like this story for a couple of different reasons. Because I like Elisha. He succeeded Elijah, the Shunammite woman. Okay. And it begins, it's 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning with verse 8, and here's her story. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. And she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food with her. By the way, Shunem was not a Jewish town. So she may not have been a Jewish woman. Now she said to her husband, behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please, let's make a little walled chamber. Let's set up a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there. To this day in Israel, different houses, different places have a little room that they will set up, and they will call it a room for Elisha. And people who travel through can stay in the room for Elisha. I have an acquaintance of mine that lives in one of those rooms near Jerusalem, and has a little window that she looks out of. And she calls it Elisha's room. And she stays there repeatedly. It's kind of like an inn, you know, or what we would consider to be a bed and breakfast. Very simple room. But that's what this woman did. Make for us a little chamber, a little room for Elisha. One day he came up there and turned into the upper chamber, and he rested. And then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him, and he said to her, say now, behold, you have been careful for us with all of this care. What can I do for you? What would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. This is another way we know that she was not an Israelite. He says, I can speak to my king, and she says, but I live among my people. I don't live in your king, under your king. So then he said, what is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, truly she has no son, and her husband's old. So he said, call her. When he had called her, she stood in the doorway, and he said, at the season next year you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, manservant, man of God, don't lie to your maidservant. But the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, even as Elisha had said to her. Okay, miracles do not depend on you believing in the miracle. Did you hear me? Yeah. The miracle does not depend on you believing in the miracle. Unfortunately, I've heard that a lot in the church today. You didn't get your miracle because you didn't believe. The Shunammite woman didn't believe. The prophet spoke the word, and guess what? The miracle still happened, even though she did not believe it. So, there. That's an aside. The woman conceived and had a son. Verse 18, when the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said to his father, my head, my head. And he said to his servant, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door behind him, and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. And he said, why do you go to him today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. And she said, it will be well. Now, why would he say, why do you want this to go see the holy man today? It's not a new moon, it's not a Sabbath. If it was not a pattern for her to go see the holy man on what? The new moon and the Sabbath. They went to see the prophet on those days. So the new moon was also a day for seeking the word of God, just like Sabbath was a day for seeking the word of God. I'll just read the rest of the story because I like the way it ends. First of all, she is speaking faith this time when she says it will be well. And she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward, and do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you to. So she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came about when the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi his servant, behold, there's the Shunammite. Run down and meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered Gehazi, it is well. I think she didn't trust Gehazi. And I think for good reason. Anyway, when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught a hold of his feet. And Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said to him, let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. And the Lord has hidden it from me, and has not told me. Then she said, did I ask for a son from the Lord? Did I not say, don't deceive me? And then he said to Gehazi, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. If anyone salutes you, do not answer him. Lay my staff on the lad's face. And the mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And so he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was neither sound nor response. So he returned and he met them on the way and told him the lad did not awake. When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both. And he prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on him. And the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house, once back and forth. And he went up and he stretched himself on the lad again. And the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes, and he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. And he called her. And when she came into him, he said, take up your son. And then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground. And she took up her son and went out. I'm not going to go into all of the stuff of that story. I love that story. I cry every time I read it because there's so much in it. But the focus that we want to see in it today is that it was her pattern to go see him for Rosh Chodesh. So one of the things that we do on Rosh Chodesh is seek out the word of the Lord, seek out the prophet. One of the things that happened when the enemy came against God's people, repeatedly, one of the first things that was tried to be wiped out was the marking of the months, or the new moon. during the time between the testaments that we often call, I grew up being told that between the last of the prophets and the first of the New Testament there was how many years of silence, right? But now as I'm studying, I'm finding out there wasn't all this silence. That was the time of the Maccabees. That was the time of the Grecian coming in and taking over the land. That was a time when there was a lot of stuff happening in Israel. And there was Word of God delivered during that time. But one of the things that happened was that they made it illegal to celebrate Rosh Chodesh. One of the reasons that the Maccabees raised up against the Greek army had to do with the fact that they were not allowed anymore to do three things. One was circumcise their sons. Two, they were not allowed to celebrate the Rosh Chodesh. Three, they were not allowed to celebrate the Sabbath. The fourth thing that happened that became the turning point, that brought about the war, that we end up celebrating the victory in when we celebrate Hanukkah, was when they sacrificed a pig on the altar. And they went around the nation and they tried to force the priests to eat pork. So those four things became signs in Israel. They became important signs to the Israelites. They became so important that they defied anyone who would block that out. To be circumcised, to circumcise your son. To celebrate the new moon. To celebrate the Sabbath. And to not eat foods that were forbidden, such as pork. Those became defining things. Anytime the enemy has come against God's people, those were things that he's tried to wipe out. Every time. He did it with the Greeks. He did it during the Crusades, the Dark Ages. When they had all of the wonderful instruments of torture in Europe that were used. The Inquisition. Do you know what things were used to determine whether or not you had converted or whether or not you stayed Jewish? It was those same four things. Whether or not you celebrated the new moon, whether or not you kept Sabbath, whether or not you ate pork, and whether or not your son was circumcised. If those four were found in place, you were found guilty of being Jewish, and you were killed. Those four things identified the people of God to those who hated the people of God for various reasons. I asked, I prayed and I asked the Lord, why is Rosh Chodesh one of the ones that is so important? Why is that one that was tried to be wiped out? I understand the others. I kind of understand the others. But why Rosh Chodesh? And if you think about it this way, it's because this is how all the other festivals are set. All the other festivals are determined by the first day of the month. What day the festival is at is determined by what day the first is at. Because it says, on the 15th day of this month, from the first day. On the 10th day of this month, from the first day. On the 15th day of this month, from the first day. So each festival is set based on when Rosh Chodesh is set. And that becomes an important thing. There are a lot of different ways to celebrate Rosh Chodesh today. I haven't decided. I don't know for sure how we're going to be doing it. I just know that God's been speaking to me about Rosh Chodesh. Like he spoke to me for a season about Sabbath before I fully understood what he wanted me to do. And honestly, I'm still not fully there. But I do know he wants us to have a joyful celebration. I know he wants us to blow the trumpets. We may have to get ourselves a silver trumpet, but we have the shofars and we can use them until then. I know he wants us to feast. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. And I believe one of the other things he wants us to do, of course, in all of this is worship him and seek his words. Seek his words. What does he have to say for this coming month? What does he want out of us? And I think if we begin giving him the first of the month, the rest will fall into place in a different way. I have a whole lot more that I'm not going to share because I want to go on and do something on the Sabbath, but we're going to take a quick break first because for a variety of reasons, straight teaching is kind of hard on everybody, not just you, but on me too. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and do Sabbath.
I believe you guys are still
All of the stuff that we've talked about so far, the festivals that we've had, we talked about the Rosh Chodesh and all of that stuff, built on a cycle set in place by all of that, and they're all considered the big ones, especially the seven. The 7 primary festivals are considered the big festivals by most of us, and what we don't recognize is that God sees it differently. Sometimes the most uncommon is not the most special. We tend to think that common and special, we tend to think that something that happens frequently becomes something that is common, and that's not the case. Frequency is not necessarily common. Okay. All of the festivals, Rosh Chodesh, all of these things are built on a regular cycle, but they're built over the top of a cycle that's already taken place. And that first cycle, the very first cycle God set in motion, is a cycle that includes the Sabbath. Leviticus 23. You go to Leviticus a lot, right? Verses 1 through 3. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israelites, and say to them, The feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts. So remember, whose feasts are they?
The Lord's.
The Lord's feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. So before he even talks about any of the other festivals, he reminds us of the Sabbath. I say reminds us because it was already set in place. The Sabbath was not something new to the people of Israel. This was something they already knew about. Whether they were able to fulfill it or not was a whole different thing. And in fact, they probably could not do it while they were in Egypt as slaves. But God is reestablishing it. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is a Sabbath of the Lord in all of your dwellings. Sabbath comes first. He wants to meet with us regularly, not just a few times a year. Historically, remember we did this historical and prophetic and spiritual significance. Let's look at that real quick. Historically, the Sabbath is a commemoration of the creation. It is when God stood up and looked at it and said, it is good. And we already said this. He did not rest because he was tired. He rested because he wanted to enjoy what he had put together. It was very good. He stopped creating. He enjoyed what he had done. So that's one of the keys in terms of the observation of Sabbath, is to look back at what you've already created. Prophetically, Hebrews 4, verses 9 and 10. First of all, he's talking about Joshua. See that in verse 8? For if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day. He's talking about the fact that some people thought that entering the promised land was entering rest, but it was not. It was not complete. Verse 9 says, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God. There remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his. Let us therefore be diligent to enter that rest, lest anyone fall according to the same example of disobedience. And then it says, for the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow. I never had realized before that this verse about the word of God and how powerful it is was put in the context of observation of Sabbath. But it is. Not sure exactly what that means, but I know that it's there. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." Did he not? And I have had people come and tell me that Jesus has fulfilled it, therefore we don't have to. But they say that about other parts of the law. And I kind of want to go, well, then Jesus didn't commit murder, so I can? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? But isn't it one of the 10 Commandments not to commit murder? Well, it's also one of the 10 Commandments to observe the Sabbath. Spiritually, we rest in the Lord. We stop our busyness, enjoy what God has done. There's a lot of spiritual application. Traditionally, there are steps that go from the Kiddush on Friday night to Havdalah on Saturday evening that help to set the time apart. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of those. And I've got a table set over here that have some of the instruments of the Kiddush and of Havdalah. The first, and we'll go into some detail with that. There's also not just the family celebrations, because these are celebrations within the home. These are not done in the synagogue. These are done in the home. These were not done in the temple. These were done in the home. In the temple was something more. In the temple was the assembly. In the synagogue is the assembly or the convocation. And that assembly is to be about enjoying God and getting to know Him. Remember, when we did Rosh Chodesh, we read from Isaiah 66:23, where it says, "From one new moon and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come before me and worship." So in the future, all mankind will be observing Sabbath. That's what it says. I figure I might as well start practicing now. How do we celebrate it? Biblically, we celebrate it by a couple of different things. It says in the commandments that we are to remember the Sabbath and that we are to keep it holy. So there's two aspects, to remember it and to keep it holy. Exodus chapter 20. Verses 8 through 11. It's part of the 10 Commandments. And he takes a fairly large section of those 10 Commandments to explain to us the Sabbath. And it says this, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he sanctified it," or he hallowed it, or he made it holy. He declared it as special, set apart. In fact, that's exactly what the word holy means. It means set apart. It means special. It means not common. You know, we make big fancy understandings of what it is to be holy. The scriptural concept of holy means to be set apart. And it's really easy to understand in modern terms by this. We have, in most of our households, common dishes that we use every day, right? We have dishes we use all the time. But for special occasions, a lot of families have special dishes. The fine china, The really nice set of dishes that's set apart and brought out for special occasions, right? That fine china is holy. That's what it means to be holy. It means to be set apart, to be used specially for something specific. When we set apart something for something specific, we make it holy, consecrated. So if we set something aside for God, we put it apart for God, we have made it holy. Doesn't necessarily mean that fine china is in perfect shape. I don't know about you, but we have some fine china that has some chips in it. Because we've used it. But it's still our special china. Haven't seen it for a while. Maybe have to figure out how to do that. In a Jewish home, traditionally, the fine china is brought out every Sabbath. Every Sabbath. To be set apart is to be different. How is it different? According to these verses, it says the first thing is that there is to be no work done on the Sabbath. No work means you get to rest. To recharge physically, emotionally, and spiritually. To rest, no work. By the way, the Sabbath is seen as a gift, not a burden. And if you think about it this way, God knows us. He knows our tendencies. He knows that in the flesh there's always one more thing. I figured out one of the reasons I'm late to work sometimes is because I figure there's one more thing I can do before I go. There's just one thing more I can do. One thing more I can do, right? That one thing more gets us in trouble. But God knows that in our flesh, there's always one thing more we can do. The enemy loves to keep us busy. To keep us busy. I don't know if any of you have ever read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis, but I enjoyed reading the Screw Tape Letters. They're supposedly letters between one demon and another about how to keep a particular person in bondage. And first of all, he loses it because the guy gets saved. The guy becomes a Christian. And so then Wormwood is in trouble. Or Screwtape, I forget which one is which. But in the letters right into him, he says, okay, look, you couldn't keep him from getting saved, but you can keep him from being effective. Here's how you keep him from being effective. You get him so busy doing things for God that he doesn't have time to worship God and really learn to listen to God. Get him busy. Keep him busy. Make him do things. You will make him ineffective. There's an acronym for busy. Cracked me up when I saw this. Being under Satan's yoke. Busy. B-U-S-Y. Being under Satan's yoke. Sometimes just being too busy keeps us paralyzed. Sabbath is designed to stop that cycle of busyness. God knew us. He knew us well. There's a statement that I've read in many, many, many places. The question is raised often, how have the Jews survived? They're the only people group to have survived as long as they have from early on and to have maintained their culture and all of it. They're the only ones. They're the only ones. Just the Jewish people. And here's what is said. More than the Jews have preserved the Sabbath, the Sabbath has preserved the Jews. It's the keeping of the Sabbath that has kept them set apart. Remember this. Jesus said in Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Keeping Sabbath is part of the 10 Commandments, as I said. I want to show you something. There are 10 commandments, right? I'm going to put this on the board. Now you got to turn the camera, huh? There are 10 commandments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can anybody name them all? I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to do that. I won't be that cruel.
Only the ones I broke.
I can name, huh?
Only the ones I broke.
Only the ones you broke? Well, that would be most of them probably for all of us if we were honest. if we're truly honest with ourselves. The 10 Commandments. These three, oh, by the way, they're broken down different in Judaism than they are in the Christian churches. Okay? Because the first one in Judaism says, I am the Lord your God. Period. That's a commandment. I went, whoa, kind of different. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. The second one. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth, to bow down to them or to serve them. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So for people that say that grace was not in the Old Testament, here it is. He visits the iniquity to the third and fourth generation. He visits the blessing to the 1,000th generation. That's quite graceful, isn't it? That's full of grace. And then it says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. In Judaism, they combine the two, you shall have no other gods before me, with you shall not make a carved image. That's the same thing. It's just repeated. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. All three of these are about us and God. They are about us and God. Then we look at all of these. Honor your father and your mother, starting verse 12, that your days may be long upon the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor shall you covet your neighbor's wife, or his maidservant, or his male servant, or his female servants, or his ox or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay? These all 10 have to do with our relationships with people, just for lack of a better direction. God with the world. Right? But there's one in the middle that kind of becomes a hinge. The fourth commandment. And when I saw the fourth commandment, it reminded me of something. And I haven't seen this elsewhere, although it probably has been written elsewhere, because I'm not that brilliant to come up with something no one else has ever thought of. But 4 prophetically has a specific meaning. The number 4 does. And the number 4 in prophecy usually refers to earth and creation. Why? Well, because there's 4 corners of the earth, north, south, east, and west. There's 4 seasons, fall, summer, winter, spring, right? There's 4 elements. Air, earth, wind, and fire. Good, thank you. My mind just went blank. I didn't write all that down. I just wrote that there were 4 elements, etc. The number 4 has to do with creation. Did you know it was on the 4th day that inanimate objects, that the world was finished? On the 5th day, he began creating life. Okay. Then we look at the New Jerusalem, and it says the New Jerusalem is a city built what? 4 square. The city built 4 square. Prophetically, the foundation of the New Jerusalem is 4 square. There are 4 walls around it. Each wall is going to have a certain number of doors. Anyway, I'm not going into all of the prophetic of that. But what I did see is that 4 is an important thing having to do with the earth, having to do with the New Jerusalem. Okay? It becomes a foundational thing. It's key. And the fourth commandment becomes a foundation for our relationship in setting apart a special time for God, right? Because it's about God. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy to me. So it's set apart with Him, and it relates to our relationship with God because we set it apart for Him. But it also involves our relationship with others. It combines the two relationships in a way none of these others do. And how does it do that? Because it says you're not supposed to make anybody else work. The seventh day is the Sabbath day of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, not even your cattle are supposed to work on this day. So it becomes a pivotal thing and a key thing in that transition between our relationship with God and our relationship to the world. As we extend rest to others. For those who say that it's just for the Jews, remember Isaiah 56? Verses 2 through 7 says this. Blessed is the man who does this, the son of man who lays hold on it, who keeps from defiling the Sabbath, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Do not let the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord has utterly separated me from my people. Nor let the eunuch say, here I am, a dry tree, for thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, and choose what pleases me, and hold fast to my covenant, even to them I will give in my house and within my walls a place and a name, better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name, that it shall be not be cut off. Do you know who the eunuchs were? They were the servants to the temples of other gods, usually. But the eunuch that says he wants to join himself to the Lord and keeps my Sabbaths is to be received. Now, a eunuch was not allowed to serve in the temple because a eunuch is one who has been castrated. And someone who's castrated could not serve in the temple. But God is saying, even the eunuchs, even those who cannot serve in my temple, will be given a high place if they will honor my Sabbaths. Then it says, and the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants. That's the Goyim, the Gentiles, the sons of the foreigners. Everyone who keeps from defiling the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant, even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. The concept of the Gentiles worshiping God is not new to Jesus. It's not after the cross. It's not only after the cross. It was talked about in Isaiah's time. Gentiles who come and join themselves. Oh, and by the way, remember that passage I mentioned where Jesus said Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath? The word he chose to use for man is a term that relates to all mankind. He lived in a day and an age where the language was very specific. He could easily have said that Sabbath was made for the Jews, not Jews for the Sabbath, right? He could have said Sabbath was made for God's people, not for the world at large. He didn't say that. What he said is Sabbath was made for mankind. All men. Not man for the Sabbath. Of this commandment, when we look at the 10 Commandments, all of these say, do this, don't 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 do this. This one says remember. It says remember. None of these say remember. Remember to honor your parents. It doesn't say that. It says honor your father and your mother. I think it might need to say that because a lot of us have been forgetting that, you know. Our culture seems to forget that. But it doesn't say that about any of the other commandments. Only this one does it say remember. Don't forget. Don't forget. Keep the Sabbath and make it holy. That's the only one we're commanded to keep. Why? Well, probably because he knew we'd have a tendency to try to not forget it, to forget it. I think also because the attack against Sabbath has been so fierce throughout the generations that he was very specific to say, remember to keep my Sabbath. Remember it. So we remember, we keep. How do we keep it? Well, that's simple, right? Don't work. That's a simple concept, isn't it? But what is work? Now define work. Because to be honest with you, there are things that I would say is work that Janie would call play. There are things that I do that I would say was play that Janie might see as work. Because we play different, we're built different. It's different people, are we not? So the whole question has become, what is work? How do you define work? Traditionally, the rabbis determined the definition of work based on what it took to build the tabernacle. The things it took to build the tabernacle. And from the description of what happened in building the tabernacle, they came up with 39 prohibitions specific to not working. And why did they do that? Because, you know, building the tabernacle was considered an important task, right? You would think that because God makes allowances on the Sabbath day for priests to do the sacrifices and what they needed to do in the tabernacle, that was going to be okay. Because there are sacrifices to be made, and that is a form of work, isn't it? Okay, the slaughter of an animal is not an easy job, especially if you're talking about an ox or a bull. Okay? So God made exception for that. They were supposed to go ahead and do that, so we couldn't call that work. But he said when they were building the tabernacle that they were to cease on the Sabbath day from the building of the tabernacle. Even something as important in building the tabernacle was considered work, so they were to cease on it, and that's where they got that idea. Traditionally, there's a lot of specific things that you can't sew on the Sabbath because sewing was required to build the tabernacle. No creative work is to be done on the Sabbath because it was creative to build the tabernacle. No carving wood, nothing along those lines. God ceased from creation. So there's a lot of stuff that they made a big list and is now prohibited. But Isaiah 58, 13 through 14 give us some very specifics that God says about it. So let's find out how God wants it done. Isaiah 58. Verses 13 and 14. If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own thing. Well, it doesn't say it that way. It says not doing your own ways. But it means that. Not finding your own pleasure. Not speaking your own words. Then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. Now I know in your versions it may say it's slightly different. Who's got a version that says that's slightly different? Who'd be willing to read it? Huh?
Which part? 13 and 14?
13 and 14.
I have the Jewish.
The complete Jewish Bible?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you hold back your foot on Shabbat from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call Shabbat a delight, Adonai's holy day worth honoring, then honor it by not doing
Someone else have another version? Nobody else wants to read the other version?
Oh, I have the same version. You do it.
Yeah, the same as this? Okay, because there's another way that it talks about it, and the reason I'm asking is because a lot of people have interpreted some of this in some very interesting ways. And where it says in my version, not finding your own pleasure, not speaking your own words. In some it says not having frivolous pleasure, nor involving yourself in frivolity. And so you will find the Puritans defined that very specifically, that you couldn't play any games on the Sabbath. Couldn't play games on the Sabbath because it says not to have fun. That's not what it's saying, is it? I don't think that's what it means. It's not saying don't have fun. It doesn't have to all be solemn.
It's not doing your usual things, but you don't play games during the week.
Exactly. It says don't do your usual things. So it's saying for the Sabbath, God is saying don't work on my day. Don't do what you do for work on my day. So if you work a garden during the week, and it's work to you to work in the garden, don't work in your garden on the Sabbath. Some people get great joy out of pulling the weeds out of their garden. And to them it's a joy, and it's restful. Wouldn't be to me. Would not be to me. But some people enjoy that, and it's restful to them, and it nourishes their soul. So is it then work? This is one of the reasons that I try very hard not to define work for somebody else. That when I look at the 39 prohibitions, I say, but that's fun. I do that for fun. That feeds my soul. And, you know, the reality is we're supposed to be feeding our souls on things of God. Are we not? It's supposed to be a delight. We're just not supposed to do it any old way we want to. But we are to find joy in the Lord. We're to find joy in the Lord. In Jeremiah 17:27, it talks about carrying a load through the gates as being a violation of Sabbath. Jeremiah 17:27.
21. Oh, sorry.
Well, that too. Jeremiah 17:21 too. Let's go back to verse 19, and I'm just going to read the whole thing that Jeremiah said to them. Thus says the Lord to me, go and stand in the gate by the children of the people. Go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, by which the kings of Judah come in, and by which they go out. And in all the gates of Jerusalem. So he got to take turns in the gates. And say to them, hear the word of the Lord, you kings of Judah, and all of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, who enter by these gates. Thus says the Lord, take heed to yourselves, bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem, nor carry a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, nor do any work, but hallow the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. So there is a commandment here not to carry a burden outside the door of your house or outside the gate of the city, right? Nor to carry it into the gate of the city either. Now, this is where the rabbinical stuff gets really fun. In trying to determine how to apply this law, in the Mishnah, there is a debate between a couple of rabbis regarding how to honor this law. Because if you're having a meal on the Sabbath in your home, you're going to carry bread from one place in the house to another, right? Is the carrying of the bread considered work? Not if you're in your house. But is the carrying of the bread from my house to my neighbor's house considered work?
In this case, yes.
Some say yes. Some say not if your neighbor is also Jewish because they're part of your family, so therefore it's your own house. And then comes the argument, what if there's a Gentile between us? To carry it across the land of the Gentile to my other family's house becomes work then, right? So, okay, well, in order not to carry it, let's see, can I take the bread and throw it over the house? And the discussion comes, how high do I have to throw the bread for it to go to the other house? This is why I don't try to define work. But I enjoyed the reading. Now, here's something I had not thought of. The first time I read through stuff like that, I thought, ugh, they're just trying to make it hard for us. My friend Patrick said to me this: "You're reading it wrong." I said, "Oh? It's not written to define the law for you. It's written to teach you how to think it through so you know how to apply the law for yourself. It's written as a challenge. We are each to study it for ourselves and decide what is work to me. And it's designed to teach you how to think it through by giving you an example of these two rabbis arguing with each other. It's showing you the thinking process to think it through to decide which is work." I went, that's a whole different way to view it. I don't laugh at it quite so much. But I still think it's a funny idea to throw the bread over the house of the neighbor to get it to your other neighbor's house. There are things that are specifically denied. You are not to carry a load. I look at it this way. Why would they carry a load through the streets and in and out of the gates? Well, to take it to market was one reason. And there is a very specific place in Nehemiah 13, 15 through 18 where he talks about specific things also they're not supposed to do. Yeah. Someone has a motorcycle out there? Or is that thunder? Huh? So Nehemiah 13, verses 15 through 18. He goes through a list of things that God is telling the people. You've been violating these. Let's not do it anymore. Okay? In those days, this is Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah had taken a break from building the wall of Jerusalem. The wall had been completed. He had gone back to the king, and now he's returned to Jerusalem. In those days, I saw people in Judah treading the wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves, loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they then brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions.
Verse?
Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 15. Now I'm in verse 16. And men of Tyre dwell there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath day to the children of Judah and to Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said to them, "What evil is this that you're doing, by which you are profaning the Sabbath day?" I can hear it now. Isn't this why the temple was destroyed to begin with? Isn't this why Israel was wiped out? Isn't this why we went into captivity? What are you guys doing? You want it to happen again. You know? Then I contended with the nobles of Judah. And I said to them, "What evil is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do this? Did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." So how does he define their profaning the Sabbath? They were harvesting, bringing in the sheaves of grain. They were treading out the wine presses. That's processing, harvesting and processing. Those were things that were not allowed in the time of Jesus. They were bringing things to market, and they were selling and buying things.
And they were making the cattle work.
And they were making their cattle work. They were making their daughters work. Yeah, you're right. They made the donkey work because they loaded the burden. They loaded him with the burden. You're absolutely right. And then he set up a way to stop the whole thing by blocking the gates. He was a governor. He did have the right to do it, and he did it. Okay? These are things that the word says profane the Sabbath day. How you want to apply that, I'm going to leave it up to you. There's another place, and I didn't find it, and I could have had, I had a little bit more time on this. But it says not to kindle a fire on the Sabbath day. There's a specific verse where they were judged or criticized for kindling a fire on the Sabbath day. The halakhic process, the defining of kindling a fire, has gotten to the point that in many Jewish quarters you can't start a car on the fire. Why not? Because to start a car, you turn the ignition and it creates a spark. The spark is considered the kindling of a fire. Any electrical connection, the way it works is by creating a spark. So you can't turn lights off and on. So you can't push the elevator button. So if you want to go to synagogue, you have to live within walking distance. And by the way, there's this length at which you can walk on the Sabbath day. By the time of Yeshua, that was very specific. You could only walk so far. That, I know, is thunder. Yeah. I think that in putting all of those additional things on it, in defining it out that far, it's that putting a hedge of protection around it. But what it's doing is it's making it a false hedge of protection. Because it's making it about the details, not the spirit of the law. When Yeshua taught the law, as he did on the mountain, we call it the Sermon on the Mount, he put a hedge of protection around the law too. Just like the scribes and Pharisees had done. But his hedge of protection was a little different. He said, you've heard it said, don't do this, but I say, don't even think it in your heart. He made it an issue of the heart, not an issue of the actions. So when he put that protection around the law, he made it an issue of the heart. He went back to the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. Okay. The letter of the law tried to define exactly what it meant to kindle a fire by saying you can't start a car. You can't turn a light off and on. You can't start the stove. So you can't cook on the Sabbath. There's a way around that. You have the fire going before you start your Sabbath. But this was why, actually, I think crock pots might have been something that they were, wow, it's close. There's a lot of things, Jewish people are great inventors. There are a lot of things that have been invented over the years, like the crock pot, which is all about the slow cooking. You start it on the fire the night before, and that's what you eat the next day, so that you're not working on the Sabbath. There are Sabbath lights, where instead of turning it off and on, you just turn the shade, and it blocks it. There are Sabbath elevators in Israel today, where you don't push a button. Now, they're a little slow, because they're set to stop at every floor. So you don't have to push the button to tell it which floor to stop at, but that's a Sabbath elevator. There are Sabbath cell phones that are designed not to work. Yeah. You can buy them in Israel. You can buy the program and attach it to yours today. I try not to get into the details of the don'ts, because I think Yeshua was more about the do's. I really do believe he was. And I think even in all the readings that we've done, there was a lot about the do's. Do make it a joy, make it a joy, make it a joy, make it a joy. Do we need to close the door?
No, it sounds nice.
Okay, well, it smells, we can leave it open, I don't care. I just saw you shivering a little bit. And I just don't want you to be cold. Be comfortable. There was a bird that was sitting right there. That was interesting. Yeah, there was. It just flew off. As soon as Craig stood up, I watched the bird flap, and I went, okay, that was different. The other night, the cat from over there was watching me from his little house. Anyway, Yeshua made it about the do's. What were some of the things he did on the Sabbath? He healed on the Sabbath. He made it about the do, doing good for someone. Healing someone on the Sabbath. Oh, by the way, he took that to the point that he had someone pick up his bed and walk. Wasn't that carrying a burden? What he was showing us is that health and well-being is a law that precedes the legalistic don'ts of the Sabbath. Being healthy and whole is what God wants for us. He was not violating the Sabbath, by the way. He was violating some very narrow interpretations of it, but it was not against the scriptural command. And he defended it using scripture. He supported the disciples doing what it took to feed themselves. In Matthew chapter 12, and this is where we see his biggest discussion about Sabbath. This is his biggest direct discussion about the Sabbath. Matthew chapter 12. It says this, "At that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry. And they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.'" Why was that not lawful? Because that was what? Harvesting, right? Taking the grain hence. And Jesus said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? And he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God, and he ate the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath, and yet they're held blameless? The priests in the temple slaughter the ox. Yet I say to you that in this place there's one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, 'I desire mercy and not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. The Son of Man. Now that's not saying that he becomes Lord over the Sabbath and he gets to declare what it is. What he's saying is when, how do I phrase this? I want to be very careful. It's a rephrasing of the statement, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's a rephrasing of that statement. Okay? The Sabbath was made for mankind. It was made for us. It was not meant to rule over us. We were meant to rule over it. That's what he's talking about there. He's using an example from the Word to show that there is a law that supersedes the details of the keeping of the Sabbath, and that is the law of life and the law of health. And even the law of comfort. Because David's mighty men of valor could not have gone another few hours without food. Let me ask you that question. Trained warriors stopped at the tabernacle and they ate food that was meant for the priests. You really think they couldn't have made it a few more hours to another place to get food that was not designated for the priests? But they were hungry. So they were allowed to violate that because they needed to eat something. The disciples plucked a few heads of grain and did this and then munched on them, like munching nuts. Okay? They were hungry. Yeshua is saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And he was letting them know right then and there that, you guys have made so many stringent laws about the Sabbath that you've made it hard for anybody to do it. When he was departed from that location, he went into their synagogue. It was still the Sabbath. And behold, there was a man with a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, So is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? They were trying to trick him, right? They might accuse him. And he said to them, What man is there among you who has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out. And he was restored, whole as the other. And the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. They really couldn't say he violated the Sabbath because he used their own reasoning. their own halakhic process to say, no, this is what we're supposed to do. There is a higher law, the law of love, the law of joy. One of the reasons God gave Sabbath to man was that we might rest. In Exodus 31, 12 through 17, it says something very specific about the Sabbath and about the keeping of it. Verse 12 says this, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. And you will keep the Sabbath, therefore, for it is holy to you. Anyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that person will be cut off from among his people. Work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is the sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And when he had made end of speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written with the finger of God." This was written with the finger of God, this part. Think about that. Wow. But he says it's a sign. It's a sign of the covenant. But what is the covenant about? Clear back in 13 it says, "That you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you." Is the Sabbath about what good we do for God, or is the Sabbath about what good he does for us? What's it a sign of? It's supposed to be a sign that God is the one who makes us holy. We don't make him holy. We couldn't. He already is. We can't even really make the day holy. We couldn't. He already did. But we can defile its holiness. And what it's for is to show that he is the one who makes us holy. We can't do it ourselves. 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 There is no works involved in salvation. There's no works involved in being holy. We can break that holiness. We can defile the holiness he's given to us. Doesn't take away from the holiness, though, because he's the one that made it holy. Does that make sense? It doesn't take away from the holiness because God has made it holy. But we can defile it. We can violate the holiness of it, just as we can violate the holiness of our salvation by behaving in ways that are not honoring to God. Does that take away from our salvation? Well, that's a question some people would really want me to answer, and I'm not sure I can. I know it takes away from our joy. I know it takes away from the blessings God can give us. Just like defiling the Sabbath takes away from the blessings. Because defiling it takes away from God's blessings. He said that. If you will do this, then I will do this. If then, right? It says, if the foreigner who joins themselves will also keep my Sabbath, then I will bless them. We keep forgetting about the if-thens. We just want the blessings. If then. There are specific ways of doing the Sabbath, and I want to real quickly walk through some of the things that are used traditionally in order to sanctify the day, okay? To remember and to keep. Remember we said it was to remember and to keep, right? Did you ever wonder why there were 2 candles on the Sabbath? I've asked that question, and I looked it up, and I thought, I found a lot of different visions about it, a lot of different versions about it, but the one that made the most sense, and the one that I saw the most, was there's 1 candle to remind us to remember. One candle that reminds us to keep. To remember the Sabbath day. To keep the Sabbath day holy. In some households, there are more than 2 candles. But there are 2 candles per person who lights them. Traditionally, the woman lights the Sabbath candles. Why? That's a question I always ask. Because it was by the seed of woman that sin came into the world, and by the seed of woman will light come into the world. Or by the seed of woman came Yeshua into the world. So the woman lights the candles. It begins with something else, and there it is. This represents a Zedekiah box. I couldn't find one. Sabbath begins and ends with Zedekiah. What is Zedekiah? It's giving to the poor. Did you know the tithe was set apart to feed the poor? It wasn't there to make the temple strong. It wasn't there to feed the priests. The tithe was there to feed the poor among you. Okay? So the Zedekiah is to feed the poor. It's an offering. Everyone gets to bring something. Everyone gets to bring something and put it in. And to say a blessing. The Zedekiah box is only used to help the poor. So the family gets to determine how they use it now. They no longer have to take it to the synagogue and let the rabbis figure out how to do it. They put it in, and then they take it some point, someplace, when they've got whatever they believe needs to be enough. They will give it to someone who is poor. They will use it for a mission. They determine how they're going to use it. But it's specifically for the poor. It's charity. A few coins in the Zedekiah box before lighting the Sabbath candles. It's for the purpose of Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. In Judaism, there's that concept, and it's something that I'd never heard of until a few years ago. That we are the ones who destroy the world. Well, guess what? We're the ones that are required to repair the world. Part of how we do that is by taking care of the poor. Okay. Even the youngest of children are encouraged to put money in it. And of course, there's always a blessing. And there's a specific blessing. And when I get the copier fixed, I can make copies of this for you if you want. Or you can go online to HebrewsForChristians.com, which is where I got this from. And he has a concise manual for Christians, the Shabbat Seder Guide. And it's a pretty good one. I've looked at several different Seders for Sabbath. His is probably the most inclusive, although there's a couple things he left out that I will talk about. The next, once you give your Zedekiah, the offering, then you light the Sabbath candles, and there's a specific prayer over that. The woman lights the candles 18 minutes before sundown on Friday night. Okay. How about when you decide that Sabbath is going to start that night? Okay? But again,
Specifically when in the Bible, just before.
it says sunset.
Yeah.
When is sunset? Well, they don't want to miss it. Again, we built the fence. We don't want to miss it. We don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to light the candles after Sabbath has started. So just in case, we figure there's a specific time. And by the way, you can sign up for this on your cell phone. You can sign up for this online. I get an email alert that reminds me of exactly what time to light the candles on Friday night. There's an app for that. I'll show you after we're done. But there's an app for that. The Sabbath candles. There's an app for that. It'll tell you exactly what time. You can go to Chabad.org and find it. They will send it to you. The woman covers her head. And she covers her eyes. She lights the candles and covers her eyes quickly. She covers her eyes so that she doesn't see the candles burning yet because she hasn't said the blessing yet. So you're not supposed to kindle a fire on the Sabbath. So you light the candles before you say the blessing because the blessing is what brings in Sabbath. Every other holiday is done the opposite. You say the blessing and then light the candles. But not Sabbath. It's the other way around because they don't want... Once you say the blessing, it's now Sabbath. So she lights the candles, covers her eyes. says the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kirshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehayot or legayim goyim, v'natan lanu et Yeshua mishekenu har shalom. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with your commandments, and commanded us to be a light to the nations, and who gave to us Yeshua, Jesus our Messiah, the light of the world. Then she takes her hands, she waves them over the candles 3 times. And then she looks at the light of the candles. And this is the beginning of Sabbath. It's the beginning of Sabbath. Why does she wave it like this? Because we're supposed to take the light to the world. And there's a couple of other interpretations that I'm not going to get into because I didn't write them all down. Now the next thing, as Janie said, you light the candles, you bless your husband. He's supposed to bless you. Then you bless anyone in the family. And she said that because she doesn't have children in the home right now. In this particular Seder, he doesn't do the wife and husband's blessing. He goes right to the children. But I wrote it down because once you light the candles, then you bless your family. And you start by the wife is blessed by her husband first. And there's even a specific song that is sung. And basically it's the reading of Proverbs 31. And it is sung to her. And a groom...
Not at our house.
Not at our house either.
Okay.
He can sing, but he hasn't learned it. But the concept, one of the things that they do in preparation for a wedding is the groom is taught how to sing the song for his bride. And their first night, their first Sabbath together is a special Sabbath where he sings it specially to her. Okay? And it's a beautiful thing to bless your wife. This is something I think is missing from our churches today. Families who keep the Sabbath in Judaism don't have divorces. They've done some studies on this. The families where they don't keep Sabbath have more divorce, a higher divorce rate. Well, if every Friday night he's singing a blessing over her and she's singing a blessing over him and we're blessing each other, it's hard to hold on to anger while you're blessing. So he sings Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. She blesses her husband with Psalm 112 and reads it. Huh?
It's a long one.
Psalm 112? It's not that long.
Oh, it is.
No.
What am I thinking of?
118 is long.
Yeah.
But Proverbs 31, in fact, you know what? It might not be a bad idea. Let's just read these verses. I need a man who's willing to read Proverbs 31, 10 through 31.
Open your mouth for the speech of 10. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will not have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar and also rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates. When he sits among the elders of the land, she makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates.
You know, what was the women's lib movement was biggest upset and biggest complaints, and how many women complain about it? Nobody ever notices the work I do around the house. Nobody ever notices the work I do. Nobody ever notices the work I do. I'm going on strike. I'm not going to do the dishes for a week, right? Every Friday night, the husband acknowledges the work his wife is doing to keep the family going. Psalm 112. This is what Sheba prays over him. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commandments. His descendants will be mighty on earth. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches will be in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. Unto the upright there arises light and darkness. He is gracious. The righteous will be in everlasting remembrance. He will not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. His heart is established. He will not be afraid until he sees his desire upon his enemies. He has. In traditional Judaism, they light the candle, cover their eye, then say the blessing. And as they're saying the blessing, they're ushering in the Sabbath by ushering in the light. And then they take the cover, then they look at the candles to enjoy the light. Then there's the blessing of the wife, the blessing of the husband. Then there's the blessing over the children.
You bless them even if they're not there.
You know,
We do.
I
We
do.
do.
yeah, I think it's a great idea. If they're there, it's really good. Then you get detailed with it. But even if they're not there, why not bless our children when they're not there? And the basic blessing is very simple. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh for the boys. For the girls, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Okay. And then for the whole family and any guests you have in your home, you then include in your family, comes the next one. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his face to you and give to you peace. And of course, it's got it here in the Hebrew. One of the things I like with this particular one is that he's got it in the actual Hebrew. Then he's got it in the transliteration so you can figure out the pronunciation of it. Then he's got it in English here, but he's got it directly under, so it doesn't always make sense in English. That makes it hard for me on this one. But you bless your guests. I'm not used to
We
it.
do it in English. Or something with the Hebrew.
Yeah. Then we get to have Kiddush. Kiddush is the glass of wine. It is the sanctification, and by the way, from the time of the lighting of the candles until the drinking of the Kiddush, you can't do anything but the blessings. You're not supposed to have any idle chatter. You're supposed to just do the blessings in. Huh? Yeah, tell your husband that, right?
No idle chatter. I like that. The head of the house does the wine.
Yes. The woman lights the candles. The head of the house blesses the wine. We have one here. Huh?
Does he drink it after he blesses it, or?
Sure.
Blood?
No.
No, I'm kidding.
Everybody does.
Everybody does out of the same cup?
Cool. If we do out of the same cup, if it's just us. But if
Some
we have
families,
guests, then we'll do the little cups.
yeah, I was going to say what some families will do is they will have a large cup, and the head of the household will say the Kiddush. He will say the blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. But for Sabbath, he does a little bit more, and he usually says, and there was evening and morning the sixth day, and the heavens and the earth were finished, and all of their host. And on the seventh day, God finished all of his work, and he rested. And then he says that about the wine. Okay? And he pours it into each cup from the one cup. So that's another way to do it. Many households he drinks from the cup, and the cup gets passed around the table. But not all households want to do it that way. I don't blame you. A lot of churches still, by the way, a lot of liturgical churches still have the one cup and you go up and you drink out of it, and then they wipe it in between with a sanitizing wipe. Yeah. There are churches that do that way. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri harafen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. The way he's got this is just really different for me, but this is how it would be in English. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, and was pleased with us in his holy Sabbath and love and in favor. He gave us a heritage, a memorial of the work of creation, for it is this day beginning the holy convocations, a memorial of the exodus from Egypt. For you chose us and sanctified us from all the nations, and your holy Sabbath with love and favor you gave us a heritage. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who sanctifies the Sabbath. And after that blessing is done, now the Sabbath began and it has now been sanctified, and then they pass the cup around. Okay. This is a very traditional service. It's not one we have followed. After that is the washing of the hands, and I don't have a bowl up here, but usually there's hand washing that happens next. You've already had the drink, now you wash your hands. And it's because they were commanded to wash their hands, and there's a whole ritual around it. And do you remember in the Gospels, they complained, some of the Pharisees complained because the disciples of Yeshua ate with unwashed hands. They had taken this and began applying it to every single meal, not just the Sabbath. And their criticism was they were eating without washing their hands. You didn't do the ceremony right. You didn't do the ceremony right. If you don't do the ceremony right, you shouldn't be eating at all, right? Well, guys, let's not get legalistic. But there is a washing of the hands. You fill a large cup, holds 4 ounces, at least 4.5 ounces with water, so that's how legalistic it can be. Yeah. Many people use special hand washing cups that have 2 handles to make it easier to pour the water, because what you do is you put your hands in the water. The one hand comes, you put the cup in the water, and you pour the water over your hands. It's supposed to be pouring the water over your hands, not putting your hands in the water. We typically put our hands in the water, and then use the one hand to pour the water over the other. You will note on Saturdays, we have a basin out here, and I think it's still got water from yesterday because I forgot to empty it. There's a basin in the entryway here that we use, some of us, just as a symbol, as a sign. This is Sabbath. I want to make sure that my hands are clean before the Lord. And it's just a symbol, but it's there for people to use if they want to. I know for me, using the symbolism has become very helpful. And say, okay, Lord, I'm washing off the stuff of the world right now. I'm entering your sanctuary, and I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be about you. And I pray, and I wash my hands every Saturday before we begin services. In the Sabbath, in the sanctifying of the Sabbath, they pray and they wash their hands. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with the commandments, and has commanded us about washing the hands. And it's the ritual of washing the hands to make sure that we are clean before the Lord. In the temple, there was a laver, and they washed their hands in between the sacrifices, right? There is no more temple. But it is said the Jewish home, when they set the table for Sabbath, becomes a temple before God, and they want to be reminded of that, so they wash their hands at the table to remind themselves that their home is now a temple before God. The husband is the priest before God. And as the priest washed his hands in the temple, we want to wash our hands to be clean before God. Everything has a meaning and a reason. And if we're doing it without understanding the reason, to me it's vain repetition. But we remind ourselves. Then there's the blessing of the bread. There's always 2 loaves of bread. There's supposed to be 2 loaves of bread because of the double portion of manna that was given to the people. Remember that they were given manna every day, except for on Friday they were given a double portion so it would last through the Saturday. So they didn't go out and pick up the manna on the Sabbath. They were given a double portion. So on the Sabbath table, there were to be 2 loaves of bread. It's for that double portion. I also think it's a great reminder of the fact that Jew and Gentile will be together in the household of the Lord. Just like the bread that is waved at the first fruits offering in Shavuot. There's a blessing that is said for that. Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. That one I do, that one I know. Blessed be Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. When he's done this, breaks a piece of bread off, and I can't break a piece of bread off of this because this is plastic. So it's our demonstration. Can't drink this either because it's not crushed yet. Takes up salt. And either you sprinkle the salt on the loaf, or you put salt on a little platter, and you break off a piece of bread, and you dip your bread in the salt. You pass the bread around, and everybody takes a piece of bread and breaks it off. You rip it off. You're not supposed to cut it. The body of the Lord was never broke here. It was broken off. The bone wasn't broken, the flesh was. You break it off, dip it in the salt, and then you eat it. The salt, traditionally, is because that helps you remember the sacrifices in the temple. Every sacrifice in the temple was offered with salt. Every sacrifice was offered with salt. So that's the purpose of the salt, traditionally, to remind us that in the temple, just like in our homes, the sacrifice needs to be offered with salt. I also think of another thing when I think about this, and I think about Yeshua saying, "You are the salt of the earth." You are the salt of the earth. Rabbi Hillel, who predated Yeshua, had a conundrum. He had a question that was asked of him. Are the Jews in the diaspora, are those who are living outside of Israel, who are no longer practicing Judaism, are they Jews? And his question was, how do you make salt salty again? That's what he asked the man who asked him. Can you make salt salty again? And the man said, I don't know, can you? He said, sure, with the afterbirth of a mule. Think about it. A mule. What is a mule? Can a mule have a baby? No, they can't. There is no afterbirth of a mule. It is impossible to make salt salty again if it's lost its flavor. It's not possible. He said, sure, yeah, with the afterbirth of a mule. Now, in rural societies, they get that a little bit more. I heard Boaz Michael from First Fruits of Zion talking about it in Portland, and he said he had just discussed this in one place, and everybody kind of looked at him with this totally dumb look on their faces. And he had to explain. And he mentioned it in another place that was a rural community that had animals and cattle, and they all started laughing as soon as he said it. He didn't have to explain it to them. He said, so, you got to remember where we're at. There are things that are said that are cultural. Okay? Yeshua said, can salt lose its flavor? If the salt loses its flavor, can it become salty again? He asked the same question. If we're believers in Messiah and we lose our identity in him, can we ever be made salty again? Now, it's been interpreted in Judaism to mean that no, salt can't lose its flavor. It's impossible. If it loses its flavor, it's no longer salt. So a Jew who lives in the diaspora, who does not celebrate Judaism, is he still a Jew? And they say yes, based on birth. At the same time, has he lost his flavor? Probably not. Probably people around him kind of know who he is. But is it possible that we lose our flavor? But we use the salt on the bread. All these things have meaning. And if I don't hurry up, we'll never get out of here. And I need to keep going. After you've lit the candles, after you've given the tzedakah, that's first. Then you light the candles. Then you bless each other, and you bless the wine, and you share the wine. Then you bless the bread, and you break it, and you dip it in the salt, and it's shared around the table. Then and only then do you get to eat the rest of the meal, and idle chatter can be returned to the table. Bantering, enjoyment.
After meal, then you can do idle chat.
I guess it depends on how you define idle chatter. And this becomes one of those legalistic things, kind of like playing games on the Sabbath. What is idle chatter? It depends on whether or not you're enjoying it, huh?
We need to adjust the carburetor because the engine's running a little.
Once the meal has been enjoyed, then there's songs that are sung. Sometimes songs are sung even in between the lighting of the candle and the blessings. Sometimes there's songs put in there, but everyone sings these songs. There's a list here that are given. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom. I don't have it in front of me.
What about a spoken word?
I
Can't carry a tune in a
You
bucket.
put a CD in,
That's what we do. We've been.
and then sing along with it, even if you can't carry a tune in a bucket. The Lord says to make a joyful noise before Him, and it's a way of worship. Find your way of worshiping. There's another one that's Shabbat Shalom, and that one we have done, and that one I can sing easily. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Hey! Right? You gotta do the hey. Somebody's gotta do the hey.
You gotta stand up and do that.
Yeah, and there's dancing and all of the fun stuff. And that is how Sabbath is brought into the family. In many households, following the Sabbath meal, in observant areas, the husband will then leave and go have a mikvah, which is a baptism, or a type of a ceremonial bath, and go to the synagogue for a special prayer service that concludes the evening before he goes to bed. In many observant households, that is an every week thing. In some households, it does just the opposite. He has his mikvah before he comes home to do the Kiddush. And that would make sense if you only have one mikvah in a community, because you can't have all the men in the bath at the same time, right? And different families take different lengths of time with their meal, and if they won't hush, Jamie, stop it.
It's not a mandate.
Turkish bath.
So that becomes a tradition. There are prayer services that are done on Sabbath during the day. And there are specific prayer services that are correlated to go along with the specific sacrifices in the temple. From the morning prayers, the sacrifice, the Torah reading is usually done in the morning service. They have a cantor that reads the Torah. We have a Torah scroll there. We don't have a cantor. We don't try to read it. Yet. But we will. We're getting there. We're reading the letters better. We're practicing.
We're just starting out.
Well, you know what? I've had some people ask if I will do Hebrew letters this fall as a class, and I'm thinking I might do that. If there's enough people interested, I would like it. It would be fun. If we can do it as a group, that'll help me reinforce it, because, you know, if you don't practice something, you lose it, right? And so I'm finding myself, I haven't been practicing enough, and it's getting harder, again, to read it. But anyway, all day is spent doing enjoyable things. Many people take a nap. I like taking a nap on Saturday afternoons. I love taking a nap on Saturday because I'm exhausted by then. But
Yesterday.
yeah, I did too. It's part of why I'm so tired today. But it's fun times. It's enjoyable times. Havdalah is how Sabbath is closed. Sabbath is concluded. The commandment is to sanctify the Sabbath, to make it special, to set it apart. When we sanctify something, there's a beginning to it and an ending to it. And the Havdalah is the is the service that has been brought together to conclude it. And it goes back for generations, a long time. This is a Havdalah set right here from Jerusalem, from Israel, that I borrowed from Tammy's shop in the front. and I'll put back. This is the Kiddush cup, and this is the plate that's used. Why is there a plate? I'll explain that in a minute. This is a spice box. These are hand-painted. It's a beautiful little set. I like it. I may just have to buy it one of these days. And this is for the candle. It's got a special shape because it's a special candle. This is a Havdalah candle. There are 4 wicks. There are always 4 wicks for a Havdalah candle because what it is 4 candles braided together. Why 4? Anybody have a guess?
So it will stand up.
So it will stand up? Well, you could have 3 and it would stand.
Because of the commandment,
What?
because of the fourth commandment.
Partly because of the 4th commandment. It's the 4th commandment to remember the Sabbath day. But also remember when I talked about 4, it represents the whole earth, right? The north, the south, the east, and the west. The commandment, the 4 candles are used and woven together because in doing Havdalah, you are declaring the joy of the Sabbath to the whole world, the 4 corners of the earth. And you're declaring with the prophets that one day, all those who have been dispersed throughout the 4 corners of the earth will be also enjoying this day. So it's a prophetic act. I always thought that was interesting. See, I always thought it should have 3 also, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, because that's from my background. But then I started looking into why the 4, and it makes sense now to me. It's 4 candles, always 4 candles braided. It's usually flatter than this. I had to work this one to get it to fit a regular candle holder because I didn't have a special Havdalah candle. So we got it softer, we molded it so that it would fit right. But the Havdalah candle will be more flat, it's wider, it's the 4. By the way, it has the blue in it to remind you of the tzitzit, which is on the prayer shawl, or on the talit, designed to remind us of the temple. On the talit, a traditional talit, the tzitzit doesn't have a blue anymore because there's no temple, so they've taken it out, but they've kept it in this. The commandment was to have a blue thread. Look up the meaning of blue. It'll be different. And there is a spice box. The spice box has special spices in it. This is the spice box that we have here, that is used here. And it has cinnamon and cloves in it. Sweet spices. They're supposed to be sweet spices because Sabbath is supposed to be a sweet day. It's supposed to be sweet. This is another way of doing the Kiddush cup. And you have it on a plate. Huh? It's a pretty big one. You might not want one this big. Because I'll explain what happens. For Havdalah, you start with the blessing, and I have a little handout guide. I've got 2 of these that printed before the printer jammed. These some friends of ours brought to us, and it's a simplified version. And they said we could make copies all we wanted, and so we do. It's a saying goodbye to the Sabbath and a hello to the rest of the week. It distinguishes between the holy and profane, or the holy and the common, which is what the priests were supposed to do. In Leviticus 10, it talks about the priests and the need to define that which is holy from that which is common, to separate that which is sanctified from that which is not. And so this is a way of doing that. Behold, God is my salvation. I trust and I am not afraid, for the Lord my God is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. Therefore with joy shall you draw water from the wells of salvation. Thine, O Lord, is salvation. Thy blessing be on thy people. Selah. Lord of hosts, be with us. God of Jacob, be our refuge. Selah. Lord of hosts, happy is the man who trusts in thee. Lord, save us. May the King answer us on the day when we call. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and so may it be with us. I will lift up the cup of salvation and proclaim the name of the Lord. Do you remember it says the Lord took the cup after supper? The cup of sanctification. The cup after the Sabbath is considered his cup. You lift the glass of wine, but you don't drink from it. Not yet. He hasn't even lit the candle yet in this. Yeah. You lift the glass of wine, but you don't drink from it yet. And you all sing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And then you put it back down. And you wait. You take up the spices. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates diverse spices. Then you pass the spices around the table, and everyone takes a deep breath and breathes it in. And I went, why? Because as we breathe in the smell, did you know smells are one of your first memories? Smells last a long time. Breathe it in. You want the peace from Sabbath to last you all through the week. The deeper the breath, the longer it lasts you. Why do we do Sabbath? So we can have peace. So they breathe it in, they pass it around the table. Some people have a tendency that as they pass the spice box around the table, and I think this is a really cool custom. What was your favorite thing about Sabbath? What was your favorite thing? And everyone who takes the spice box, you know, this Sabbath I really enjoyed this. And everyone tells what they enjoyed about the day. It's a good way to remember. We've done that with our grandkids sometimes with our dinner. We have a jar called the blessing jar. And we sit down and we have a meal, and we don't do it all the time, but we do it sometimes. What do you want to be thankful for today? Write it down on a paper. And then we share it with each other at the table, and then we fold it up and we put it in the blessing jar. If we ever get to feel like we're never blessed, just take some of those things out and read them. A blessing jar. We are always blessed. We just don't always remember it. So that's a pattern that's used. After that, then you light the candle. Then you light the Havdalah candle. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the light of fire. Why do you wait till then to light it? Because by now the sun has set, and you know it's no longer Sabbath, and it's okay to kindle a lamp. It's okay to kindle the fire. So you light the candle, and you look at it. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who makes a distinction between the holy and the profane, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 days of work and labor. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, who makes a distinction between the holy and the profane. And then it is a custom to sing another song, one that I knew as a Passover song. And it's about Elijah. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hapilahati. They've got different words here. Anyway, basically what it says is that it's calling out for Elijah the prophet, Elijah the Tishbite, Elijah from Gilead, Elijah from Galadi. Come quickly to us in our day and bring us Messiah. That's what it ends with Mashiach ben David. Come, Elijah, and bring Messiah. So every Sabbath they end by crying out for Messiah to come. By crying out for Messiah to come. By the way, it is a traditional teaching now, and I have read it on more than one place and from more than one source. And I don't know which Rebbe came up with it. But in the Chabad movement, the Rebbe said, if every Jewish household around the world will sanctify this Shabbat one time, Messiah will come. There are Chabad houses being established all over the world by the Chabad movement. What is the Chabad house for? So that there's a Jewish household in every major city where you can go to sanctify the Sabbath, setting apart with this, and then ending it with the Kiddush. And they believe that when it is ended, when they do this next thing, which is to take this light When you sing to Elijah, you lift the cup, cry out for Messiah to come. You pour some of the wine on the plate. They believe that when you finish singing that song, Elijah come with Messiah, and the candle is put out in the wine. If every Jewish household will do that once, they believe Messiah will come. So they are established in cities all over the world because they want Messiah to come. I want Messiah to come too. There's a part of the word, there's a song that we sang at the very beginning. It's a Paul Wilbur song, Adonai. And in the song, it says that same thought. It says, when all of Zion sings, Baruch haba b'Hashem Adonai, blessed be the name of the Lord. When all of Zion will sing that out. Every knee will bow to you, Lord Most High. And it's saying that here Jerusalem waits. Praises lifted on high. Here the beautiful gates long to see you arise. When all of Zion sings, Baruch haba b'Hashem Adonai. And they've taken that and they've put it in the other direction. Because the word says that when they see him, they will sing this. And what they're saying is, now let's sing it so we can see him. Okay? So that's where that comes from. When the candle is extinguished.
How long do you leave it lit?
During your process. While you're singing, while you're enjoying each other. And it's really not lit very long in this service. There's other services, there are other ways of doing it where it's lit a little bit longer, but you use the same candle from week to week to week. So it's not lit very long. Once this light is extinguished, Sabbath is over. Back to the rest of the world. But that doesn't mean we don't take the light of Sabbath with us. And that's the whole idea behind smelling the spice and viewing the candles and doing the blessings. It's not done just to keep traditions. I want to say that again. I don't teach this so we can learn how to keep traditions. What I'm teaching this is so that we can learn what they mean. And if there's another traditional way, another way you can do it, another way you can do it that will bring about these things and help us remember these things, do it that way. There are many, many, many Havdalah ceremonies that you can download and read and look at. There are many you can buy. There are books that Tammy has in the bookstore there. There are books I've picked up on the coast. I have a book over there, Keeping a Jewish Household, and there's a whole chapter on Sabbath from a Jewish perspective. There are many ways of doing it. Don't get bogged down with the details, but do figure out what the blessings are and what it means. Pick up what's helpful. Do what's helpful for you. The word just says we're supposed to remember it and we're supposed to sanctify it. How we remember it, how we sanctify it, is kind of an individual thing. Okay? It's not commanded that you light candles on Friday night. You'll not find that in the Bible anywhere. It's not commanded that you have a Havdalah service on Saturday night. You won't find it in the Bible. It's not one of the commandments. But it is a method, a way to help us keep and observe the commandments that are given.